The reservation book lay open. Every table was full. The dining room glowed with warm lights, the scent of fresh bread drifted through the air, and laughter echoed against polished walls. Yet the man standing quietly at the entrance, holding the small hand of his exhausted daughter, was looked at as though he didn't belong. The host barely glanced at him before shaking his head and pointing toward the door. The little girl looked up at her father with confused eyes, wondering why no one wanted them there. What none of the staff knew was that the tired black single dad they had just turned away wasn't a customer at all. He was the owner who had built that restaurant from nothing. And within minutes, every single employee who had judged him by his appearance would discover the biggest mistake of their careers. Before we begin this unforgettable story, take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who believes in kindness, and subscribe to Kindness Corner if you believe that every person deserves respect, second chances, and to be judged by their heart instead of their appearance. Your support helps spread stories that remind us all why compassion still matters. Marcus Williams had spent 15 years chasing a dream that almost everyone around him had told him was impossible. He had grown up in a neighborhood where opportunities disappeared faster than hope. After losing his wife, Elena, to a sudden illness 5 years earlier, he became both mother and father to his 6-year-old daughter, Ava. Every morning started before sunrise. He packed school lunches, braided Ava's hair after watching countless tutorial videos, helped with homework, and somehow still managed to oversee one of the city's fastest-growing restaurants. It wasn't glamorous behind the scenes. There were sleepless nights, unpaid bills in the early years, and moments when he questioned whether he could carry the weight of grief and responsibility at the same time. But every time he looked at his daughter smiling across the breakfast table, he remembered why giving up was never an option. The restaurant wasn't simply a business to Marcus. It was a promise. It was built in honor of Elena, whose recipes inspired nearly every dish on the menu. Their dream had always been to create a place where everyone felt welcome, no matter who they were or where they came from. The walls displayed photographs of families, community events, and handwritten notes from loyal customers thanking the staff for making them feel at home. Marcus believed that good food could fill empty stomachs, but kindness was what truly fed the soul. As the restaurant became more successful, Marcus stepped further away from daily operations. He hired experienced managers, trusted them to protect the culture he had worked so hard to create, and focused on expanding community outreach programs. Every month, the restaurant donated hundreds of meals to shelters and struggling families. Marcus rarely introduced himself as the owner. He preferred watching quietly from the background because he believed true leadership wasn't about recognition but about serving others. That evening had already been exhausting. Ava had spent hours at a school science fair, proudly showing her handmade volcano while Marcus cheered louder than any other parent. By the time they arrived at the restaurant, Marcus wore faded jeans, an old hoodie with flour stains from baking with Ava the night before, and worn sneakers. Ava had accidentally spilled juice on his shirt earlier that day, leaving another visible stain. They looked like an ordinary father and daughter searching for dinner after a long day. The young hostess barely looked up before assuming they couldn't afford the restaurant. She forced a polite smile that never reached her eyes and claimed there were no available tables. Marcus noticed at least 4 empty ones waiting to be cleaned. Before he could say another word, another couple dressed in expensive clothes walked in behind them. Almost instantly, the hostess smiled brightly and escorted them toward one of those supposedly unavailable tables. Ava watched silently, her face falling with quiet disappointment. Marcus didn't feel angry for himself. He felt something much heavier as he watched his daughter experience prejudice she was still too young to understand. Instead of revealing who he was immediately, Marcus stepped aside and quietly observed. Within minutes, he noticed other troubling patterns. A family speaking limited English waited far longer than everyone else. An elderly man dining alone received rushed service while larger groups were treated warmly. A woman wearing work boots and construction clothes was offered the least desirable table despite arriving before several others. Marcus realized this wasn't one employee making a bad decision. It had become part of the restaurant's culture. His heart sank. The dream he and Elena had built had slowly transformed into something they would never have recognized. Marcus finally walked toward the office. A few longtime kitchen employees immediately recognized him, their shocked expression spreading across the room. The restaurant manager hurried over, suddenly pale, realizing exactly what had happened. Word traveled across the dining room like a wave. The same hostess who had dismissed Marcus moments earlier froze in place as she saw employees greeting him with respect. Every face reflected the same horrifying realization. Marcus gathered the entire staff after the dinner rush. No one spoke. The silence felt heavier than any shouting ever could. He looked around the room filled with people who had represented his dream every day. Some stared at the floor. Others fought back nervous tears. Marcus spoke calmly, explaining that a restaurant wasn't judged by its decorations, expensive menu, or online reviews. It was judged by how it treated the person who looked like they had nothing to offer. He reminded them that discrimination rarely announces itself loudly. Sometimes it appears through assumptions, impatient looks, selective kindness, or invisible barriers created by personal bias. The staff had failed not because they made one mistake but because they had allowed those habits to become normal. No customer should ever leave feeling smaller than when they entered. After reviewing weeks of customer complaints, security footage, and reports that managers had ignored, Marcus made the hardest decision of his professional life. Every manager responsible for creating or protecting that toxic environment was dismissed immediately. Employees who repeatedly demonstrated discriminatory behavior despite previous warnings were also terminated. It wasn't revenge. It was accountability. The restaurant could survive financial losses, but it could never survive losing its values. Over the following weeks, Marcus temporarily closed the restaurant. Many people criticized him, saying the decision was too extreme. Others believed he had destroyed a successful business over one emotional evening. But Marcus knew healing required rebuilding from the foundation. He personally interviewed every new employee, asking fewer questions about experience and more about empathy. Every new hire completed extensive hospitality and diversity training before serving a single customer. Community leaders, teachers, and non-profit organizations were invited to help shape a culture built on dignity instead of appearances. When the restaurant reopened, something extraordinary happened. Customers noticed the difference immediately. Every guest was welcomed with the same genuine smile. Children received coloring books regardless of what their parents looked like. Elderly visitors were treated with patience. Construction workers, business executives, tourists, students, and homeless veterans using community meal vouchers all sat side by side. The restaurant no longer felt exclusive. It felt like home again. Ava often sat near the window doing homework after school while watching people come and go. She noticed something beautiful. Faces that entered carrying stress often left carrying peace. One rainy afternoon, she quietly asked her father why he hadn't simply forgiven everyone without making such difficult changes. Marcus smiled gently and explained that kindness without accountability isn't kindness at all. Real compassion protects those who might otherwise be hurt tomorrow. Months later, a handwritten letter arrived from the former hostess. She admitted that losing her job had forced her to confront uncomfortable truths about her own prejudices. She had completed community service, attended cultural awareness programs, and started volunteering at a local shelter. She thanked Marcus not for firing her, but for refusing to let her continue becoming someone she never wanted to be. Marcus quietly folded the letter and placed it inside a small box where he kept reminders that people truly can change when they choose humility over pride. The restaurant eventually became known for much more than incredible food. Schools brought students to learn about leadership. Business owners visited to understand how culture shapes success. Community organizations partnered with Marcus to host free meals, job fairs, and mentoring events. What began as one painful evening became the turning point that transformed a local restaurant into a symbol of fairness and hope. If this story has touched your heart so far, please take a moment to like this video, share it with your friends and family, leave a heartfelt comment, and subscribe to Kindness Corner. Your support allows these powerful stories of hope, courage, and compassion to reach people who may need them most today. Special request: before this story ends, please comment below with the words, "Kindness sees what appearances hide." We'd love to know where you're watching from and what lesson stayed with you the most. Marcus never forgot the sting of being denied a seat inside the restaurant he had built with love, sacrifice, and endless determination. But he also refused to let that painful moment become a story about anger. Instead, it became a story about responsibility, growth, and the courage to defend values even when the cost was high. Ava grew up watching her father prove that true strength isn't measured by wealth, power, or success. It is measured by the willingness to stand for what is right when it would be easier to stay silent. And every evening, as families filled the restaurant with laughter once again, Marcus looked around the room and quietly smiled, knowing that Elena's dream had finally become exactly what they had always imagined, a place where every person, regardless of race, appearance, or circumstance, would always have a seat at the table.